Ready, set, go.
All right, hi everybody. This is Dr. Jessica Wright, and I'm here again today with our academic educator, Natalie Zuniga, who has been describing how building virtual teams can happen. And last session, we talked about the dynamics of teams, setting boundaries and creating interdependence. And I'm so excited because today she's going to take us on the second phase of our journey towards building virtual teams. Hi, Natalie. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much, Dr. Jess. It's a pleasure to be here. And so thank you for that good recap of building virtual teams. And we did talk about trust. And the next section, if you go, we like to always start off with a neat quote. And says, a team is not a group of people who work together. A team is a group of people who trust each other. Just as kind of a reminder of what we talked about trust. And the different forms to build that trust. And this is from Simon Sinek, who I'm sure you guys know his very famous TED Talk. If not, I would YouTube it. It's really, really good. Okay, so we are going into group formation. We talked about group dynamics, and now we're going to talk about the importance of group formation and why this matters when we're building the virtual teams. Again, as I said earlier, this is an interdependent study that I did my research on from Sean Hansen, and he really talked about the importance of group formation. And the point is that we focus all of our attention in working with building teams, and everyone's kind of like in different places, right? When we're and we're not seeing them as we used to, or we're building new teams. So it's very important to understand the common patterns of group formation and how they develop, especially when when change is about to happen or we're in an environment of constant change. Because when you have this foundation of how group dynamics work, how groups are formed, there's just an easier transition for you and for you to be aware of. So there's two models that they focus on for group development models, and you may be familiar with these two. The first one is Tuckman's four-stage development, and then we will break that down and what that looks like. And then I like to offer another one that's Jersik's punctuated equilibrium model on how groups are formed. So the first one is Tuckman. And in 1965, Dr. Tuckman synthesized literature in a model of group development. And it's actually, it's a popular use today in management schools and what they teach. And the first one is forming. There's 4 steps. The first step is the forming stage. And this is when members are engaged in types of boundary setting activities. So they're in the stage of exploration. You've put people in groups, and now they're orienting themselves through, they're testing things, and they may not even know that they're testing. So they're asking certain questions. They're getting to really know who you are, and they're paying attention to the way you respond or how you perform certain activities. They're kind of finding, I know we said this earlier on our last session with boundaries, they're kind of discovering what the boundaries are and where they belong within the group, right? So everyone is doing this within groups. As you notice, you don't just know each other when you're new to a team. You're kind of really trying to figure out who each other are. So then they go into the second stage that he describes in his research as storming. This is after this introduction stage. You'll find groups in his research that there was some intergroup conflict, and there's some struggles with issues of dependence and interdependence, because in reality, we're trying to find out if we can trust one another. And so we're kind of almost guarding our hearts, if you will, right? We're guarding who we are, and we're new to this team. And so there's this internal struggle, like, can I trust them? Can I not lean on them? Can I depend on them? Can I not? So there's also this internal conflict that can be sparked. And then you have this storming phase with each other. And there's times within groups when he really studied different groups, he found that there was groups and participants who may sometimes push back against each other and they're trying to assert their personal, independence, and no, I don't need you. That's what's kind of happening internally. However, and there's all this emotional response, and there's some people who try to avoid this stage because they don't want to have any conflict. But then we talk about it in the conflict resolution, and you should definitely check it out, about emotional chandeliering, because we try to avoid this stage. And we think it's normal, but at the end of the day, there's this like huge explosion, and there's an emotion that's disproportionate to what's actually happening. I would really recommend visiting our conflict resolution series. And Dr. Jess deep dive on the science behind that as well. But what Tuckman says is that it's almost the idea of there's a huge calm after the storm. So it's a natural part of group development to sometimes have this conflict, and it actually makes the team stronger when you're able to overcome and push through the conflict after resistance is overcome, of course, because everyone's trying to figure out. And so you go through this storming phase, and you're able to you're kind of almost challenge yourself, who am I and where do I belong in this group? And I'm going to really share my thoughts. And it opens up almost communication. And then he says that you go into this third phase of development, of group development. It's called norming. And norming is when it's the third stage, and there's this cohesiveness in the development. You are now starting to gel with one another because you've learned the boundaries, you know what to do and not to do, you know how everybody's different, your differences, and you value one another, and there's this trust. And now you have new standards have evolved within the group, and new roles are adopted, right? So if someone, maybe they need their time to think and they're not fast responders, or someone is just very passionate, so they just like to talk a lot, they have to talk their ideas out and those kinds of things. So just there's a new role, there's new understanding within the group. And now you can really focus on the task that's at hand, or the objective that's at hand, and you can now freely express, hopefully, your personal opinions without feeling that you're going to be attacked or anything like that. And the norming stage is a period of group development that you really start having your social and operational norms. Okay, so for example, you have the rules of code of conduct for behavior within your group, and you just really start beginning to gel through your differences. And then, which leads to the last stage, and it's called performing. And the group moves into this fourth stage, and it really focuses on that interpersonal structure, and it kind of becomes the tool of task activities. So your roles become flexible and functional, and you have this group energy where you kind of, now there's strong interdependence, there's strong boundaries, and you're flexible. You know what your leader needs, or you know what your team needs, and you start learning one another. And you have those structural issues now have been resolved, and now you can be really supportive to one another in order to achieve or solve a task or really perform really well. So, so you can make significant progress once you're in this stage. So it's kind of just to see it all together. You have the forming, norming, and performing. And this is Tuckman's fourth stage of development. And now there's similar models out there that have followed this form of structure. There's one from, I believe, Hare. In his research, he talked about defining a situation, developing new skills, develop appropriate roles, and then carry out the work, right? But this is where, like everything, there's not one shoe that fits everyone, right? So not all group development actually happens linear. I've experienced this form of group development, absolutely. But I like to introduce another model, because there's times that group development happens in a circular form, and this is the Dursik functional equilibrium model. And in his research, he says that not all groups go through this steady development stage. Some do, but some don't. Some groups actually don't have that storming at the beginning, especially if there's a task at hand. there's this really good inertia that happens. They first meet, and I'll break down those phases. They go into this really good inertia, and they're getting together, and then there's moments of transition. And in those moments of transition, that's where you may find like something happens, a change happens, and then you go across maybe some adjustments, and that's where you may come across some conflict. So, and this is kind of a model that is probably what we're faced today, maybe in the hospital today as well, where we are really time constraints. We are dictated by time constraints. There's deadlines, there's new processes and procedures. So maybe there's not time of that usual kind of Tuckman's 4-step stage of development for group development. So there's last minute changes, something happens, and this is probably a model that may fit well with that. So let's go into the first meeting in phase 1. So in his research, he immediately, in every team, members display a framework that they have, right? Because again, you have a new team together and your goal is to maybe save a patient's life, right? Or you're going together to establish new processes for COVID-19. So you have a goal in mind now, and you have to deliver a new process improvement plan or anything like that to your leader. So you're with new people that you've never met before. You know you have to work together, but you have a framework, right? That you think that you should approach this project. So, and remembering that, it's very important. You have to remember that every person has their own personal deadline and goal within who they are as they're adjusting, right? So they decide on the plan, they maybe disagree on a task. Some members may feel uncertain, but all they have to really have that foundation is a framework. So every framework is unique as illustrated, and that's why some teams may begin harmonious and really good interaction patterns, and then you have this midpoint transition. So, and from the research, they saw that this was very, very actually common, that wherever let's say if my deadline is in a month, at that 15th day, that midpoint day, that midpoint time, that time of transition, there was always transition that always happened. So whether it was always done like that with the calendar. And though they were driven by a deadline, something happened. Either the new software didn't work, or there was another person added to the team, or the executive or your executive VP or the leader who's ever in charge of the program said, no, you're in the wrong direction, you have to change. And in this midpoint transition, this is where people would find themselves maybe at a crossroads, right? So there's where they probably saw conflict arising. If they didn't really have that trust built, if they didn't take time to build that trust, or they didn't really understand the boundaries. And because there's also that sense of urgency that they need to finish, and they're driven by a deadline. And excuse me. And they're trying to take into consideration maybe organizational context, et.cetera. So they have to now come into another new form of agreement. And so regardless if some of the groups that they studied, they actually transitioned pretty well, but there were some that didn't, and they would sometimes get stuck. So whatever it may be, hopefully they worked it out, and there was always conflict. And this is important to know that sometimes when fast change happens, you will find teams that worked really well together all of a sudden feel like they're at a crossroads. And what they're doing is they're really trying to understand and manage the change. So I'm really excited to see what Dr. Jess has to talk about, because I think it's going to be really helpful to understand and learn how to manage that change when you feel and you see that your group is at this transition stage. And then you go into phase 2. And after that, members approach now their task clearly with the changes that need to be made, with advancement. And what they found in the groups that they were studied is that even though sometimes there was internal issues that went maybe unaddressed, if they did go unaddressed, then things worsened during the phase 2. You'll have people leave or whatever it may be. But those that were able to successfully handle that change or any conflict, as they move towards phase 2, that they started performing exceptionally well. And they did really well, and they were even stronger than they were before. And then it goes into completion. And this is where they complete the task, they generated new materials, they met the deadline, they can prepare, they show explicit attention towards, the outside requirement to what needs to happen for the organization's success. So they really, really handle, when task performance, this group development worked really, really well. So just to kind of give you a visual and bigger picture, so you have this performance, a project time, and you know that this group is only going to be together during this deadline process, this short burst project. You'll see this kind of activity happening. There's a first meeting, midpoint transition into phase 2, and then completion. Okay, so I like that there's 2 different kind of forms of models when it comes to group development, depending, because you have to learn how to manage that and be aware of the teams that you're trying to lead virtually, depending on where maybe you have new people joining the team and they're adjusting to this kind of equilibrium model versus a traditional 4-stage model that you've had 2 or 3 years ago. Without everything that's going on now. So what I want you guys to do is really evaluate your team. How are teams formed in your department right now? Are you guys following that kind of same path, or you feel like you're more focused on deadlines and deliverables because we are in just really unprecedented times? That's a common saying. But then which group formation do you experience the most in your field of work? Like, do you feel like you're constantly in that equilibrium model, or you're constantly leading more in the other stage? It's really important to know how teams are being developed. The teams that you are a part of are being developed. And then, the last question is, are you now aware of what to look or check for where the team is in development? So let's say you can say, okay, now this shows when this last minute change is happening, I see that this team, though they're storming, they're going to push through and hopefully succeed out of this and become even a stronger team. So hopefully these 2 models really give you an idea of group development, but also for your own knowledge, so you pay attention to the teams that you're a part of, that you're contributing to see where they are as well. Thank you, Dr. Justin. That is all that I have for you today.
Yeah, Natalie, this has been really fantastic, especially to go beyond the, a lot of us have heard of the 4 stages of the, the forming, norming, storming, norming, right? All of the 4 stages that we've just been through. And then also to talk about, if you've already established your team and now you're transitioning, having that model to talk about the transition being like sort of the crunch point, right? And so as we transition in and out of different waves of the virus and different sort of stages of, going to, some of us were starting to come back into the office and then now are back home. And some of us have been at the hospital the whole time and, trying to figure out how to manage this next wave of the virus and just all the change that's happening. This has been really fantastic. Thank you, Natalie.
My pleasure.
I can't wait for the last session talking about tips for virtual teams.
Yes. Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.